Black girl loses job after saving injured millionaire. The next day, 2 helicopters land at her home. Alicia Johnson was a young nurse who believed in one thing more than anything else. Every life mattered. She'd grown up in a small neighborhood where resources were limited and opportunities were rare. Her mother had always told her, "Alicia, if you can help someone breathe easier, you have already done something greater than gold." Those words had stuck with her since childhood and guided her decision to become a nurse. Working in the city hospital was never easy. The shifts were long, the patients were many, and the pay was never enough. Still, Alicia never let those struggles shake her purpose. She wore her white uniform with quiet pride, knowing that behind every patient who smiled again, she had played a part. But sometimes, even people with the strongest hearts need a moment to breathe. On weekends, Alicia often went hiking into the mountains. It was her way of escaping the heavy noise of the city, the endless beeping of machines, and the weight of constant emergencies. The mountains gave her peace. The tall pine trees whispered with the wind, the rivers sang with soft melodies, and the snow-covered peaks stood like guardians of silence. That Saturday morning, the sun painted the skies in gold, and Alicia carried her small backpack, filled with a bottle of water, a few bandages always because she never left without them, and a sandwich wrapped carefully in foil. She tied her curly hair back, tightened her shoelaces, and started her usual trail. She thought it would be just another walk, another day to refill her tired soul. But fate had different plans. As she walked deeper into the forest path, her eyes caught something unusual on the grassy patch ahead. At first she thought it was just a fallen tree branch, but then she noticed movement. Someone was lying there. Her heart skipped a beat. Alicia ran forward, her instincts already switching into nurse mode. A man lay on the ground, his shirt darkened with blood. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, his body stiff with pain. Alicia froze for a split second, then dropped her backpack and rushed to his side. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked quickly, her hands already pressing near the wound. His lips moved faintly, but no sound came out. His eyes fluttered, half open, half closed, as if he were slipping between worlds. Alicia pressed her hands over his chest wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," she whispered firmly. "You're not going anywhere today. Not on my watch." Her training took over. She tore a piece of cloth from her own hiking scarf and pressed it firmly to slow the bleeding. With her other hand, she checked his pulse. Weak. Very weak. Panic threatened to rise inside her, but she pushed it down. There was no time for fear. Minutes felt like hours. The man gasped weakly and opened his eyes just enough to see her. His voice was cracked, barely a whisper. I'll give you everything." Alicia frowned, leaning closer. "Don't speak. Save your strength," but he repeated in a broken tone, "Everything. I'll give you everything." Alicia shook her head. "All I need is you to keep breathing." She knew she had to act fast. She grabbed her phone from her bag, but there was no signal in the valley. Her heart raced, no way to call for help. She looked around. Nothing but trees, mountains, and silence. Think, Alicia. Think. She remembered a ranger station she had passed an hour earlier. If she could get there, maybe she could send a signal for help. But she could not leave him alone in this condition. He needed constant pressure on the wound, and his pulse was fading. Alicia did the only thing she could. She dragged her backpack close, placed his head gently on it as a pillow, and kept pressing on the wound. She sang softly, a tune her mother used to hum whenever Alicia was scared as a child. "You are not leaving today," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Not while I'm here." The man's breathing grew uneven. Every second felt like the edge of life and death. Alicia whispered prayers in her heart, pressing harder, refusing to give up. Finally, after what felt like forever, she heard the faint hum of an engine in the distance. A ranger jeep appeared on the trail, 2 men inside. Alicia jumped, waving frantically. "Over here! Please help!" she screamed. The jeep swerved and stopped. The rangers rushed out carrying emergency supplies. Together, they stabilized the man, giving him oxygen, and finally, after a long, desperate struggle, they loaded him into the jeep to take him down to a helicopter waiting near the base. Alicia stood there, her hands covered in blood, her chest rising and falling in exhaustion. She had saved him. She had no idea who he was, no idea why he had been out there in the mountains or what his words meant. But she knew one thing. She had fought for his life with everything she had. and sometimes that was all a person could do. As the Jeep drove away, Alicia picked up her torn scarf and bloody gloves. She sighed deeply, the reality of what had just happened settling in. She whispered to herself, "I hope you make it." What she did not know was that saving this stranger's life would change her own forever, because that man was not just anyone. He was one of the most powerful men in the country, and his promise, "I'll give you everything," was not just a weak whisper from pain. It was a vow, and soon Alicia's world was going to turn upside down. The morning after Alicia had saved the stranger in the mountains, she woke up feeling both drained and strangely proud. Her arms ached from holding pressure on the wound for so long, and her clothes still carried faint stains even though she had washed them late into the night. She remembered his pale face, the weakness in his voice, and the way his eyes had searched hers as if he was holding on to life through her presence alone. The words he had spoken echoed faintly in her mind, "I'll give you everything." At the time she had brushed them aside, thinking they were nothing more than the confused ramblings of a man on the edge of consciousness. For her, the real gift was simply knowing she had done her duty as a human being, not because she wore a nurse's uniform, but because her heart would never allow her to walk away from someone in need. With that thought, she put on her scrubs, tied her hair neatly, and prepared to go to the hospital. She had already decided not to mention what happened in the mountains. In her mind, saving someone's life was not a story to be told for glory. It was a responsibility she had carried out quietly. But as soon as she walked into the hospital lobby, she noticed something strange in the way her colleagues looked at her. Some nodded politely while others whispered under their breath. Alicia brushed it off and went straight to her station, ready for another long shift. By mid-morning, however, her supervisor called her into the office. The woman's expression was sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line and her voice unusually cold. "Alicia, we need to talk about your behavior yesterday." Alicia blinked, confused. "My behavior? You did not show up for your scheduled shift on time. Patients were left waiting and the staff had to cover for you." "This is unacceptable." Alicia's heart sank. She explained quickly, telling her about the hike, how she had stumbled across a man who was dying, how she had fought to keep him alive until rangers arrived. She spoke with honesty, her voice trembling as she recalled how close he had been to death. She thought perhaps her supervisor would understand. Perhaps she would see that saving a life, no matter where, was the highest duty of a nurse. But instead, her supervisor leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "That was reckless. You left your post for personal reasons. Hiking is not part of your job. And emergencies outside this hospital are not your responsibility. You jeopardized our schedule and failed to report in. This hospital cannot tolerate such lack of discipline." Alicia stared at her in disbelief. "You mean, I should have walked away? I should have let that man die?" "You should have been here," the supervisor replied coldly. "Rules exist for a reason. We cannot run this place on emotions." Tears stung Alicia's eyes, but she bit her lip, holding them back. She wanted to argue, to shout that humanity was greater than paperwork, that compassion was more important than clocking in, but the decision was already made. The supervisor pulled out a letter from the desk, slid it across the table, and said the words that shattered Alicia's heart. "You are terminated, effective immediately." Her hands trembled as she picked up the letter. The weight of it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. She had worked years to become a nurse, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and personal time. She had given her whole self to her patients, only to be cast aside for doing what she believed was right. When she stepped out of the office, the hallway felt colder, and the stares of her colleagues burned her skin. Some looked away in silence, others glanced with pity, and a few even smirked as if they were glad the strict, always dedicated Alicia had finally stumbled. She walked out of the hospital without saying a word, her heart heavy, her mind clouded with doubt. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Cars honked, people rushed across streets, vendors shouted about their goods. Yet Alicia felt strangely invisible, like a leaf carried by the wind with no control over where it would land. She found herself walking aimlessly until she reached the small park near her apartment. She sat on a bench, pulled her knees close, and let the tears she had been holding finally fall. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered to herself. "I saved a man's life. Isn't that what a nurse is supposed to do? Isn't that what a human being is supposed to do?" The questions had no answers. She thought about her bills, her rent, and the little money left in her bank account. Without her job, she did not know how she would survive the next month. The weight of uncertainty pressed down harder than any wound she had treated. That evening, she returned to her small apartment. The lights flickered weakly, a reminder of the overdue electricity bill. She made herself a cup of tea, though her hands shook too much to hold the cup steady. As she sipped, she stared out the window, remembering the stranger's face. She wondered if he had survived. She wondered if his family knew how close they had been to losing him. She wondered if he remembered her at all, and then the thought that hurt the most came to her. Even if he did survive, even if he told the world about the girl who saved him, it would not change her fate. She had lost everything she worked for because she had chosen humanity over rules. But deep down, under the heavy sadness, a small flame still burned. Alicia whispered to herself, "I will never regret saving him. If I had walked away, I would not be able to live with myself. Jobs come and go, but a life is irreplaceable." She repeated those words until she fell asleep, curled up on her small couch, her heart heavy but her spirit unwilling to fully break. She did not know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. What felt like the end was, in truth, only the beginning of a story far greater than she could dream. Because somewhere in a hospital far away, the man she had saved was waking up. His memory of her face, her steady hands, and her trembling but determined voice would not leave him. He had whispered a promise through cracked lips, and men like him did not forget promises. The cost of doing right had taken away Alicia's job. But destiny was preparing to give her something far greater in return. Alicia lay on her couch that night, staring at the ceiling as the silence of her small apartment wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. It was the kind of silence that carried questions instead of comfort, and those questions echoed louder than any sound. Her mind would not stop replaying the scene in the mountains, the pale face of the man, the blood on her hands, the desperate words he had whispered, "I'll give you everything." Those words clung to her like a haunting memory, but in the quiet of her room they felt more like an echo of a dream than a promise. What did he mean? Did he even know what he was saying? Or was it just the rambling of a man hovering between life and death? For the first time in years, Alicia felt uncertain about who she was and where her life was headed. Being a nurse had given her identity, structure, and purpose. She had always believed her job was more than a paycheck. It was a calling, a mission to make life better for others. Now, with her job gone, she felt stripped of that identity. What was left of her if she was not Nurse Johnson, the dependable caretaker? The thought left a hollow ache in her chest. Her apartment reflected her reality. The wallpaper was peeling slightly in the corners, and the table wobbled when she leaned her elbow on it. The refrigerator hummed but held only a few items: a carton of milk close to expiring, some bread, and a jar of peanut butter. She opened the fridge, stared at the contents, and closed it again. Hunger gnawed at her, but her appetite had disappeared with her peace of mind. She thought about her mother's words again, the ones that had carried her through nursing school when money was tight and nights were long. "Do good, Alicia, even if nobody thanks you, God sees. The world sees, even if it takes time." Her mother had always believed that kindness carried its own reward, but Alicia could not help but feel abandoned by that belief now. She had done good. She had given everything to save a stranger's life. And what had it brought her? Emptiness, joblessness, shame. The weight of doubt pressed harder on her chest as the night grew deeper. She curled up on her couch with a thin blanket pulled over her shoulders and let the tears fall freely. She did not sob loudly, for there was no one to hear, no one to comfort her. It was the quiet kind of crying, the kind where each tear carried a memory, a hope, and a loss. Her phone buzzed once on the small table beside her, breaking the silence. With trembling hands, she picked it up, half hoping it might be a message from someone who cared. It was not. It was just a reminder about her overdue electricity bill. She set the phone back down, the light from the screen fading into the dark. The doubts grew louder in her head. Maybe her supervisor was right. Maybe rules mattered more than compassion. Maybe she should have walked past that man and pretended she had seen nothing. If she had done that, she would still have her job. She would not be sitting here wondering how to survive the next month. But even as those thoughts pressed down on her, another voice, quieter but steadier, rose within her. It was the part of her that had knelt in the grass, pressing her hands against a stranger's wound. refusing to let go. That voice whispered, "Would you have been able to live with yourself if you had walked away?" Alicia shook her head slowly, wiping at her wet cheeks. No, she would not have. Losing a job was painful, yes, but losing her humanity? That would have been unbearable. She hugged her blanket tighter, as if holding on to that inner truth would keep her from breaking completely. The hours passed and sleep finally came, but it was restless. Her dreams carried her back to the mountains, to the man's face, to his whisper. In one dream, she saw him stand tall and strong, smiling at her with gratitude. In another, she saw him fade away into nothingness, his promise of everything dissolving into the wind. She woke several times in the night, her heart racing, her mind unsettled. Each time she reminded herself it had only been a day since it all happened. Perhaps the man had not even survived. Perhaps she had held on to him with all her strength only to delay the inevitable. That thought terrified her more than losing her job. When the first rays of dawn crept through the thin curtains, Alicia rose from the couch, her body heavy with exhaustion. She brewed herself a weak cup of coffee and sat by the window. The city was waking up, people rushing to work, children tugging at their parents' hands, buses honking as they moved down crowded streets. Life carried on as if her personal storm did not exist. It struck her how the world never paused for anyone's pain. Her world might have shattered, but outside everything moved forward without her. As she sipped her coffee, she whispered to herself, "I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I know I did not fail. I did what was right." She repeated those words several times as though planting seeds of strength in soil that felt barren. She had lost her job, yes, but she had not lost her integrity. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that mattered more than any paycheck. Still, doubt lingered. Would she ever find another job? Would another hospital hire her after being dismissed for insubordination? Would she even be able to pay her bills next month? The questions hung heavy unanswered. She sighed deeply, feeling the battle between fear and faith play out inside her. That day passed slowly. She tried to distract herself by cleaning her apartment, rearranging things she had already rearranged 100 times before. She read an old book her mother had left her, but the words blurred in her tired eyes. She walked to the corner store, bought the cheapest groceries she could afford, and returned with a small bag that barely filled the shelf. When evening came again, Alicia sat on her couch staring out the window at the city lights. The doubts from the previous night still pressed at the edges of her mind, but beneath them something new stirred, an unshakable determination. She had survived one night of doubt, and she could survive another. She whispered once more into the quiet room, "I will not regret saving him. Even if the world turns against me, I will hold on to that truth." What Alicia did not know was that while she sat in her small apartment, battling her doubts, forces far greater than her imagination were already moving. The man she had saved was alive. He was recovering, and he had not forgotten her. In fact, he was searching for her. The night of doubt was only a shadow before the light that was about to break into her life. The next morning began like any other for Alicia, except her heart carried the same weight of uncertainty from the days before. She had no reason to hurry anywhere now. No shift waiting for her. No patients to attend. No calls to answer from the hospital. The silence of her apartment felt heavier than before, and she tried distracting herself with small tasks, washing dishes that were already clean, folding clothes she had folded yesterday, and sweeping the floor even though there was hardly any dust. These tasks did not fill the emptiness. They only reminded her of how much her life had changed in a single day. She sat near the window with a notebook in her lap. It was the same notebook where she used to jot down goals and reminders from her nursing shifts. Now the pages were blank, as if waiting for her to rewrite her life. She picked up a pen and tried to list down ideas for what she could do next. Apply at smaller clinics, perhaps volunteer at community centers, maybe even go back to school if she could afford it. But the words would not flow. She closed the notebook and sighed, staring outside at the quiet street. That was when it happened. A low rumble filled the air, faint at first, then louder and sharper. It was unlike the sound of cars or trucks. It was heavier, more powerful, and it seemed to make the ground itself tremble. Alicia stood up quickly, stepping closer to the window, her heart racing. The sound grew louder and louder until the air around her small building seemed to vibrate. Then she saw them, two massive helicopters slicing through the morning sky, their blades spinning so fast they looked like a blur. They were not ordinary helicopters. They were sleek, black, and imposing, the kind she had only seen in movies or on the news when government officials traveled. Her neighbors rushed out of their homes, pointing to the sky, shielding their eyes from the powerful wind. Children shouted in awe, and people grabbed their phones to record the unexpected sight. The helicopters circled once over the neighborhood before descending slowly, their presence commanding every eye and every heart. Dust and leaves swirled violently in the air as they landed near the empty lot behind her apartment building. The noise was deafening, and Alicia covered her ears, staring in disbelief. "Why here?" she whispered to herself, her pulse quickening. As the blade slowed and the noise softened slightly, the doors of the first helicopter opened. Men in black suits stepped out, tall, broad, and serious. Their eyes scanned the area with precision, as though protecting someone important. From the second helicopter came more security personnel, along with a team of medics carrying equipment. The neighbors murmured among themselves, some speculating about celebrities, others about politicians. But then Alicia saw him. A tall man stepped down from the first helicopter, supported lightly by one of his guards. He wore a dark suit, his posture proud despite a faint limp, and his face was instantly recognizable to anyone who kept up with the news. He was Richard Lawson, one of the wealthiest men in the country, the kind of name people spoke with either admiration or envy. His companies spanned everything from technology to real estate, and he was often called a self-made empire builder. But none of that mattered to Alicia in that moment. What mattered was the memory that flashed in her mind, his pale face on the mountain, the blood soaking his shirt, his weak voice whispering, "I'll give you everything." Her heart stopped. She could not breathe for a moment. She whispered his name under her breath, almost as if saying it aloud would confirm that she was not imagining this. Richard Lawson, the man she had saved, was standing just a few feet away from her neighborhood, alive, strong, and looking directly in her direction. The guards fanned out quickly, but Richard raised his hand slightly, signaling them to pause. He stepped forward, his gaze locked on Alicia. The crowd parted as though they instinctively knew who he had come for. Neighbors turned to her, eyes wide, murmuring her name. Children tugged at their mother's sleeves, whispering, "He's here for her." Alicia's knees trembled as Richard approached. She wanted to step back, to hide, to escape the sudden spotlight, but she could not move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, her body frozen between fear and awe. When he finally stood before her, he smiled faintly, though his eyes carried the weight of gratitude too deep for words. "You," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You are the one who saved me." Alicia opened her mouth, but no words came out. The crowd around them fell silent, waiting, watching. Richard took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I remember your face. I remember your hands pressing against my chest, your voice telling me not to give up. If not for you, I would not be standing here today." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I owe you everything." Alicia's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. The moment felt unreal, like a scene written in a story she never imagined herself a part of. She finally found her voice, though it trembled. "I only did what anyone would have done." Richard shook his head gently. "No, not anyone. Many would have walked past. Many would have hesitated. But you did not. You gave everything you had to keep a stranger alive. That kind of courage cannot be measured." Her neighbors gasped and whispered louder now. Phones were lifted higher, recording every word, every expression. But in that moment, Alicia saw only him. The world faded to the background. Richard extended his hand to her, his eyes softening. "You lost your job because of me, did you not? I heard what happened, and I cannot let that stand." Alicia felt her throat tighten. She did not know how he knew, but hearing it from his lips made the wound inside her heart stir again. She lowered her eyes, her voice breaking. "It does not matter. I did not regret it." Richard's voice grew firmer. "It does matter, and I intend to make it right." He gestured toward the helicopters. "Come with me. Today is the beginning of something new." The crowd erupted in murmurs, shock, and admiration. Alicia stood frozen, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Just yesterday, she had been sitting alone in her apartment, drowning in doubt and despair. And now, 2 helicopters had landed at her doorstep, carrying the very man whose life she had saved, offering her something she could not yet comprehend. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, her mind racing with questions. Could this truly be happening? Was this the moment where her pain would transform into purpose? The roar of the helicopter still echoed in the air, but inside her another sound rose. The sound of hope. A hope she thought she had lost forever. And as Richard Lawson extended his hand again, waiting for her answer, Alicia realized her life would never be the same. The air still trembled with the echo of the helicopters as Alicia stood face to face with Richard Lawson. Her neighbors had formed a circle around them, whispering in disbelief, capturing the moment on their phones, and some even clapping nervously, as though unsure how else to react to something so extraordinary. But Alicia hardly noticed them. Her heart was thundering inside her chest, her palms clammy, her throat dry. She could hardly believe that this was real. The same man she had found on the forest floor, pleading and gasping for life, was standing here alive, powerful, and thanking her. Richard's eyes stayed fixed on hers. There was sincerity in them, the kind that could not be faked. He looked at her not as a billionaire used to commanding respect, but as a man whose life had once slipped through his fingers and was given back by the stranger now standing before him. "You may not understand the weight of what you did for me," Richard said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "When you found me in those mountains, I was minutes away from death. I remember your voice more clearly than I remember the pain. You told me not to give up, that I was not leaving that day, and because of you I didn't." Alicia swallowed hard, unable to speak. Her emotions were tangled: gratitude, disbelief, nervousness, and even a hint of fear. What did he want from her now? What could a man like him, who had everything, truly want to give someone like her? Richard motioned for his guards to give them space. Then he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I should tell you the truth, Alicia. That day in the mountains was not an accident. I was there because someone wanted me gone. It was not a simple hiking injury. It was an attack." The word struck her like a shockwave. Her eyes widened. "An attack?" He nodded gravely. "Yes, powerful men make powerful enemies. I had slipped away from the eyes of the world for a short retreat, and I was ambushed. I should not even be alive. But then you appeared. You, a stranger, risked everything, including your own safety, to save me. You didn't know who I was, and yet you stayed with me." His expression softened, the weight of gratitude plain in his eyes. "That makes what you did even more extraordinary. You saved me not because of my name, my wealth, or my power, but because you saw a man who needed help. You saved me because of your heart." Alicia felt her breath catch. The man she had thought was just an unlucky hiker had actually been the target of something darker, something beyond her world of hospitals and clinics. She glanced around at the guards, the helicopters, the intensity of the moment. Suddenly it all made sense, why such a powerful show of force had landed in her neighborhood, why his gratitude felt so urgent. She shook her head, her voice trembling. I didn't do it for any of that. I didn't even know who you were. I just couldn't leave you there." Richard's lips curved into a faint smile. "And that is exactly why you are extraordinary." The words hit her harder than she expected. No one had ever called her extraordinary before. She had been called hardworking, reliable, sometimes stubborn, but never extraordinary. Her throat tightened with emotion. The crowd continued to murmur, their whispers buzzing like background noise. Some neighbors looked at her with awe, others with envy, and a few simply with confusion. Children peered from behind their parents' legs, wide-eyed, as though they were watching a movie unfold in real life. Alicia wanted to disappear, to escape all those eyes on her, but she couldn't move. Richard's presence anchored her. "Alicia," Richard continued, his tone firm now, "I know what happened at your hospital. I know they punished you for saving me. I know they treated compassion like a mistake instead of the highest duty. That is wrong, and I intend to make it right." Alicia's chest tightened. She had kept that pain hidden, trying not to let it consume her. Yet here was this man speaking her truth out loud in front of her whole community. It was both humbling and terrifying. She whispered, "It doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done." Richard's eyes sharpened. "It matters to me. You saved my life. That is not something I forget, nor something I repay with empty words. I made a promise that day, Alicia. Do you remember?" Her heart skipped. She nodded slowly. You said you'd give me everything." He smiled faintly. "Yes, and I meant it." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. The crowd gasped collectively, as though they too understood the weight of his promise. Alicia felt dizzy. She had thought those words were nothing more than the fevered rambling of a dying man. To hear them again, spoken now with clarity and determination, sent a rush of emotions flooding through her. Her doubts from the past nights clashed with the hope that flickered to life inside her. She shook her head, her voice unsteady. "I don't need everything, Mr. Lawson. I just needed to know you survived. That's all I wanted." Richard studied her closely, his expression softening even more. "That humility is exactly why you deserve more than you can imagine." His guards moved closer again, subtly reminding him of time. Richard glanced at them, then back at her. "I cannot explain everything here in front of everyone. Come with me. Let me show you what I mean. Let me give you the life you deserve, the one that was stolen from you because you chose to do what was right." Alicia's breath caught. Come with him. Step onto one of those helicopters. Leave behind the life she knew. The only life she had ever known. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors. Some looked envious, some supportive, some doubtful. But all eyes were on her, waiting for her choice. Her heart raced. She remembered the night she had cried on her couch, asking herself if doing good was worth the cost. She remembered the emptiness, the doubt, the fear, and now, here was a man offering her a chance at something completely new. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered almost to herself, "Maybe this is why I lost my job. Maybe it was never the end. Maybe it was the beginning." Richard extended his hand again, steady and patient. "Alicia, come with me. Let me tell you the truth of what your courage has done. Your life will not be the same, but it will be greater than you ever imagined." The moment stretched like eternity. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers again as Richard guided her toward the waiting helicopters. The wind from the blades lifted her hair, her clothes fluttering as if the air itself was preparing to carry her into a new life. As she stepped closer to the helicopter, she realized something deep within her. The nights of doubt, the tears, the fear, they had all been leading to this moment. The truth was clear now. Saving Richard Lawson's life had not just been about him surviving. It had been about her destiny. And as the doors of the helicopter opened for her, Alicia knew the truth was only just beginning to be revealed. The sound of the helicopter blades roared louder as Alicia stepped inside. Her hand still held gently by Richard Lawson. Her neighbors watched in awe. Some recording, others standing frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and admiration. The girl who had been fired just days ago, the same girl who lived quietly in their building, was now being escorted into a helicopter by one of the most powerful men in the country. It was the kind of moment no one could have predicted, a moment that seemed like it belonged to movies and not to their modest neighborhood. Inside, the helicopter was nothing like what Alicia expected. The seats were plush leather, the walls lined with sleek panels, and the faint hum of technology surrounded her. It smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. For a moment she felt out of place, as though she had stepped into a world where she did not belong. But Richard's presence beside her steadied her trembling hands and her racing heart. When the doors closed and the helicopter lifted into the sky, the city below grew smaller and smaller. Alicia stared out the window, her neighborhood shrinking to a cluster of rooftops. Her life as she knew it fading into the distance. It felt surreal, as though she was leaving behind not just a place but an entire chapter of her existence. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice raised just enough to be heard over the steady thrum of the blades. "I know this must feel overwhelming. One moment you are living your life and the next you are being carried into another world entirely. But I need you to understand, Alicia, that none of this is charity. This is justice. You gave me back my life, and it is my duty and my honor to give you back yours in ways you cannot yet imagine." Alicia blinked, her eyes heavy with emotion. "I didn't save you expecting anything. I didn't even know who you were. That," Richard said firmly, "is why you are worthy of everything I am offering. If you had known my name, maybe doubt would have crept in, maybe hesitation. But you acted without calculation. You acted with heart, and that is priceless." His words washed over her, filling the hollow spaces in her chest left behind by rejection and loss. For so long she had doubted herself, wondered if compassion had been a mistake, if following her heart had ruined her life. Now, sitting across from Richard Lawson, she realized the very act that cost her everything was the same act that would change everything. The flight took less than an hour, but to Alicia, it felt like drifting between two worlds. The world she was leaving behind and the world she was entering. When the helicopter finally descended, she gasped at the sight below. Stretching across acres of land was a vast estate, with gardens sculpted like paintings, fountains sparkling in the sunlight, and buildings so grand they looked like palaces. The main house stood proudly at the center, a mansion of glass, stone, and elegance. As the helicopter touched down, staff in crisp uniforms rushed forward, not with panic, but with the precision of people who knew their duties well. The moment Richard stepped out, they bowed respectfully, and when Alicia followed, all eyes turned to her with curiosity, as though they knew she was not an ordinary guest. Richard gestured toward the mansion. "Welcome to my home, but more importantly, welcome to the beginning of your new life." Alicia's voice trembled. "Why me? Why do all this for me?" Richard's expression softened. "Because the world rarely honors people like you, Alicia. Too often, those who sacrifice the most are the ones forgotten first. You lost your job because you chose humanity over rules. That should never happen. People like you should be lifted higher, not pushed down. So if the world refuses to honor you, I will." Her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. She thought of the hospital that had cast her out, the supervisor who had treated compassion like weakness, the long nights of doubt she had endured, and now here she was being told by one of the most powerful men in the country that her heart, her choice, her courage, those were her strength. Richard guided her into the mansion. The halls were filled with paintings, chandeliers, and long corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Yet despite the wealth around her, what struck Alicia most was the warmth of the people who greeted her. They looked at her not with disdain or suspicion, but with respect. It was as if they already knew she was someone important to their employer, someone who had changed his life. Later, as they sat in a sunlit room overlooking the gardens, Richard leaned back in his chair. "I want to give you choices, Alicia. Real choices. Not the ones that life forces on you, but the ones you truly deserve. Tell me, what do you want most in this world?" The question startled her. No one had ever asked her that before. She had always thought in terms of survival, keeping her job, paying her bills, helping her patients. Her own dreams had always been pushed aside for responsibilities. She looked down at her hands, struggling to find an answer. I don't know. I've never been asked that." Richard's gaze was gentle. "Then think. Take your time. Whatever it is. Whether it's opening a clinic of your own, pursuing further studies, or even starting something entirely new, I will help you make it real. This is not about repaying a debt. This is about giving back to someone who deserves the world but has been denied it for too long." Alicia felt something shift inside her. The weight of rejection was slowly being replaced by the spark of possibility. She could see a future again, not just a continuation of survival, but a future of building, growing, creating. As the day turned to evening, Richard's staff prepared dinner, and Alicia sat at a long table, still unsure if she belonged in such grandeur. Yet when Richard raised his glass and said, "To the woman who reminded me that compassion is the greatest strength," she realized that this was not a dream. It was real. Her journey from rejection to reward had not been easy. It had been painful, lonely, and filled with doubt. But now, sitting in a place she had never imagined, she understood that sometimes rejection was not the end, but the bridge to something far greater. And as the night sky glittered with stars above the mansion, Alicia whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what my mother meant. Do good and the world will see, even if it takes time." Little did she know her greatest reward was still yet to come. The next morning, Alicia woke to sunlight streaming through tall glass windows. For a moment, she did not recognize the room she was in. The walls were painted in soft shades of cream. The bed was larger than the whole bedroom in her apartment, and the air smelled faintly of fresh roses drifting in from the garden below. It took her a few seconds to remember the whirlwind of the previous day, the helicopters, Richard Lawson, the revelation of who he was, and the promise he had made to her. She sat up slowly, pressing her hand against her chest as if to steady her racing heart. Her life had turned upside down in just a few days, and she was still struggling to believe it. A soft knock came at the door. A woman in a neat uniform entered with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Miss Johnson. Mr. Lawson asked me to bring you breakfast. He will be waiting for you in the library when you are ready." Alicia blinked, overwhelmed again by how surreal everything felt. Just a week ago, she had been stretching her last few dollars to buy groceries. Now she was being served breakfast in a mansion. She whispered a quiet thank you and forced herself to rise, wash, and dress. When she finally made her way to the library, Richard was seated by a fireplace reading a newspaper. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Good morning, Alicia. Did you sleep well?" "Yes," she said softly, her voice still unsure. "Though it feels strange. I'm still trying to understand how all of this is real." Richard folded the paper and set it aside. "It is real, and it will remain real for as long as you allow it. Today I want to show you something." They drove out together later that morning, leaving behind the grand estate. Richard's convoy moved smoothly through the city until they reached a part of town Alicia knew well. It was a community often forgotten by the world. Run-down buildings, children playing barefoot in dusty alleys, families struggling to make ends meet. It reminded her of her own neighborhood growing up, a place where dreams often felt too far away. The cars stopped in front of an old abandoned building. Its windows were broken, its walls cracked, its yard overgrown with weeds. Alicia frowned, wondering why Richard had brought her here. He stepped out of the car, motioned for her to follow, and together they stood before the crumbling structure. "This," Richard said, "is where your future begins." She looked at him in confusion. "I don't understand," he smiled faintly. "You once told me that you never regretted saving my life. That compassion to you mattered more than anything else. I believe you were born to heal, to help, to lift others. But your hospital failed to see that. They punished you instead of honoring you, so we will build something better, together." He gestured to the broken building. "This will be your clinic, Alicia. A place where people from neighborhoods like this can come for care, regardless of money. A place built not on rules and profit, but on compassion and dignity." Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the building, then at him, her eyes filling with tears. "A clinic? In my name?" "In your vision," Richard corrected gently. "You will decide how it runs, what it stands for, and how it grows. I will provide the resources, the support, the connections. But the heart of it, the soul of it, will be yours." Alicia pressed her hands over her mouth, unable to stop the tears from flowing. For years she had dreamed of something like this, but had buried that dream under the weight of survival. She had always imagined a place where people who were turned away elsewhere could still find care, where no one had to choose between rent and medicine, where healing was not measured in money, but in humanity. And now that dream was being handed to her not as a fantasy but as a reality. "Why me?" she whispered again. Richard's eyes softened. "Because you gave me life without expecting anything in return, and because the world needs people like you in positions of power, not hiding in small apartments wondering if they matter. You matter, Alicia, more than you know." Construction began almost immediately. Within weeks, the abandoned building was transformed by teams of architects, builders, and designers. Alicia visited daily, walking through the skeleton of the clinic as it took shape, feeling a sense of purpose growing stronger inside her with every brick laid. She gave input on everything: the layout of the patient rooms, the design of the waiting area, even the colors of the walls. Richard stood by her side, encouraging her to dream boldly. When the clinic was finally complete, the grand opening drew people from across the city. The sign above the entrance read, "The Johnson Community Health Center." Alicia stood at the front doors, trembling as the crowd gathered. Children clutched their parents' hands. Elders wiped their eyes, and even her former neighbors had come, staring at her with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Richard stood beside her and whispered, "This is your moment." She stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong enough to carry. "This clinic is not just a building. It is a promise. A promise that no one will be turned away, that no one will have to suffer alone, that compassion will never again be treated as weakness. This is a place for hope, for healing, and for dignity, and I want everyone here to know you are welcome." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the streets. Tears streamed down Alicia's cheeks as she cut the ribbon, officially opening the doors to the first patients. In the weeks that followed, the clinic became a beacon of light in the community. People who had long been ignored by larger hospitals found kindness within its walls. Alicia worked tirelessly, not as a figurehead but as a nurse once more, walking among patients, listening to their stories, holding their hands and treating their wounds. She hired staff who shared her vision, young doctors and nurses who believed in compassion as the first medicine. Each night, as she walked through the quiet halls of the clinic after closing, she would pause to look at the sign above the door. Her name was there, but more importantly, So was her purpose. She had lost a job, but she had found her calling. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Richard visited the clinic. He watched her moving among patients with the same quiet strength she had shown in the mountains. When she finally came to sit with him, he said softly, "Do you see now, Alicia? Rejection was never the end. It was the path that led you here." She nodded, her eyes shining. "I see it now. Everything happened for a reason. I thought I had lost everything, but in truth I was being prepared for something greater." Richard smiled. "And this is only the beginning." As the night fell and the clinic lights glowed against the dark, Alicia felt peace for the first time in a long time. The doubts that had once haunted her were gone. In their place was certainty, the certainty that her life had purpose, that her choice to save a stranger had not ruined her but had transformed her. The girl who had been fired for choosing compassion was now a woman leading with it. And as she looked out at the patients who would walk through those doors for years to come, she knew she had stepped fully into her new life. Her mother's words echoed in her heart like a gentle melody. "Do good, Alicia. Even if nobody thanks you, the world sees. It just takes time." Now the world had not only seen, it had answered.